For me, that's cheating. But I like, but also like, what's wrong with cheating? I suppose.
In recent weeks, my FPL decision-making process has tormented me, with huge hits and huge rank falls plaguing my season. It's had me questioning my entire approach for the game, and for the first time in my life, I am contemplating the use of projection models such as Solio as a serious option. And now FPL Fran is here, a man who rode the projections all the way to the top 500 in the world. And he will be the Darth Vader trying to lure me over to the dark side. In my heart of hearts it feels wrong, but given how my emotions have led me down the garden path to disaster so far, I have to keep an open mind, because I want to win this game. I want to be the FPL World Champion, and to do so means considering every approach in my quest for glory. This is a great conversation, and if like me you have been against joining the algorithm acolytes, maybe it's time we reconsider. This conversation was eye-opening, and whatever my eventual decision, I'm grateful to have had it. I hope you enjoy it, and if the thought of these programs still turns your stomach, rest assured there will be another video coming soon arguing for me to decline these projection models. So without any further ado, let's get into it with the legendary FPL Fran. So today on the channel would like to welcome FPL Fran, the first guest on the FPL Nightmare channel, and what an honour it is to have Fran here. He's currently second in the Nightmare Streamers mini league, 110 points ahead of me after just 12 game weeks, and he is just outside the top 100k with 3 green arrows on the bounce. In the last 5 years his run has been spectacular. He has had a 95k finish, a 57k finish. He came 8,164. And 2 seasons ago, Fran, you finished 437th in the entire world, which is simply spectacular. And most importantly, you are the man who vanquished me in Double Pivot's FPL Tension Quiz, which is something I still want to rematch for. So today we're here, and we're obviously going to talk about the analytical projection programs, the ones I have a bit of a reticence towards using, and you are obviously a big advocate for. So the first question, I suppose, is why do you advocate for the analytics, and which analytics websites or programs do you use in your decision-making process?
Yeah, I mean, why I advocate, I think it's a classic sort of gamer thing where, playing games growing up, my approach to games is trying to get as good as possible at them. And I think Luke, so that's formerly FS Scout Luke, but the kind of Luke that we know from the Man City predictions and generally all around like a FPL legend.
Is that Black Box Luke?
Yeah, Black Box Luke. Yeah, sorry, that's his new title, isn't it? But I think he wrote something aptly around this in the past, where he's like a classic FPL player who used to play different fantasy games without paying attention to models, because obviously models sort of predate him playing. But over time, like, models have grown up. We know that statistics have been used in sport as well. And I think football has been pretty late to adopting them. Like, you can see American sports have used them first. But I think it just goes along with that edge of, in theory, if you believe the analytical approach, it should provide better results, better understanding of the game that we like. And for a game like FPL, similar sort of lens there, where if you think statistics improve our understanding of football, I think it can also improve your ability to play FPL. And that's obviously gone from, let's say, just projection tools to, let's say, solvers as well. I mean, I can say I pretty much use all of them. I mean, Review, Solio. I also have, I'm affiliated with Hub, and I tend to use Hub in a lot of my videos as well. And I tend to use their kind of full stats package as well, like for the Opta Stats tool. But that's effectively just an accumulation of big data, and not necessarily, let's say, a model. But yeah, I pretty much use everything that I can put my hands on or try.
Yeah, I mean, you reached out to me after I made a video talking about, like, kind of my thought process about like using these programs, and I was questioning it. I suppose it's a bit like Arsene Wenger, when Arsene Wenger came into the English league, and they've gone from 10 pints after training to not having tomato ketchup, and using these sorts of advances to advance the performance as much as possible. I suppose if you use the programs, you would see it a bit like that, but obviously I am still on the fence, and I'm giving you the chance to present the argument in favour here, and I'm sure you're going to do very well in doing that. So, have you always been an advocate for the analytics programs, or was it a progression the more you played FPL?
I have to be honest, it was more of a progression, because I think the way that I approach FPL is like most managers, where you watch football, you play the game because you're in an office league, and you kind of just make the picks based on like what you like about football. Like, I saw this guy perform well in a match. I saw highlights of this player. I didn't even consume any FPL content at all when I actually started creating FPL content. And then I kind of, spoke to other content creators and realized that people were using things like models. And I mean, I myself, as I said, with my sort of gaming background, I mean, I'm quite a competitive gamer. I've competed in different titles in the past. Like I played a lot of StarCraft 2 when I was like 12, 13. Traveled around a bit in Southeast Asia and even Australia. And yeah, I mean, like what I've learned growing up with games, it's more like if there's information that's available that can help you improve. Like I think, I don't know, I would be reading forum posts to try and understand like build orders for StarCraft 2. This for me is kind of like when you go online on Twitter and you start seeing like engaged managers, share their insights and things like that. But I think it's like a gradual approach is sort of how I see it. The way the 11 and 5 spoke to me one time and kind of visualized it for me is I think everything is a model. If you're picking players based on purely eye tests, that is a model that you in your head must think in some sort of way, this player is projected to get these points. I'm picking this player. Then, for example, you have very rudimentary models. So we have market odds available. Someone like Rob T shares market odds every single week. You can easily transcribe this to the FPL scoring system. Once again, like, okay, he doesn't share all the data. Like, the clean sheet odds only go so far for some defenders. The goal odds are all that we see. He doesn't share assist odds, for example, because that's not available on the markets in terms of the sharp bookmaking sites. But you can still, once again, create a model from that, and it's going to be quite rudimentary, right? But that for me is like another progression of it. And then, of course, there are FPL models that try to encompass everything, because you have a rule system. In theory, you can try and recompute how football games will go, because players have available stats. Like I can see how many shots Rodgers is taking, per game, per season. And I think there's also studies like around whether some data is reliable in the sense that it's predictive for the future, and the whole sort of debate around XG, I think is kind of encompassed around that too. But as I said, I think the way that I approach it is I see it as whatever way you're playing, you are kind of using a model, a mental model, up to a progression model. And I just find that just looking at the results, I mean, I think people have already done studies many, many times in the past. But if you kind of like compare what is like a formerly elite data set of managers, so this is like your classic managers who have maybe like top 200s from, let's say, a decade ago, versus managers who are at the top of these kind of like all-time rankings now. I mean, they almost all use models, and they have very high median ranks, because I think the modeled approach, or a usage of a model plus solver has lended to that. And people can kind of shirk that, but I mean the reality is, like for example, Focal is now working with Tom Dollymore. He clearly uses models. Ben Crellin is obviously a legendary manager, and some people consider as the best of all time. Still, he also clearly uses models too. And I think when we see winners, I mean, I think the only argument that was made was sort of in the sense that not many winners play in a way that sort of works alongside a model, but we've already had, I suppose, a winner now who's used models too. So I think, the argument in the past was maybe you have to play in such a different way, such that a model can't compute how to win. Well, we have one winner at least so at least it's plausible to win. But then also, I think if you're searching for consistency, which a lot of people seem to also lord over, right? I think the only one who doesn't actively use models as heavily, but is aware of them. And this goes back to the point in terms of like, just simply visualizing, let's say, Rob T's tweet. In a way, like you are kind of exposing yourself to a level of information that I guess you would not have been able to create yourself. Like this is almost like a third party piece of data. You are interpreting it. And if you're using that in any way to guide your decisions, which I think a lot of managers do, right? Some people who don't actively use models and solvers still use Rob T's market odds as they're shared and use that to base their decisions for each individual game week over. So I think even in that sense, for example, like someone like Harry, who has absolutely amazing ranks, like he is also someone who very much is guided at the very bare minimum by some form of model or modeled data.
I suppose one thing I do think I actually wonder if, because we clearly live in a FPL world which is shaped by these programs and these projection models, even if we don't use them ourselves, they become the conversation. Like you could have somebody who is completely against these programs, but they still end up discussing the same players as everybody else because everybody else is discussing these players. So they are still in this world of the projection models, even if they're not using them themselves actively. But would you say when you're competing with these people, you're competing to win a game against some elite managers using these advanced models, would you say it's somewhat naive not to use them?
I think it always comes down to like what is your end goal for playing FPL? Like,
I mean, I want to win. I want to win it all.
That's the thing. I mean, if you, I think like. That's the thing. So like going back to the point about how we have, one manager so far who's won playing with models. I think, ultimately just the results just show, playing with the model is going to produce better results. Because part of it too is like, it is supposed to be supporting decision-making. It is not supposed to be, I press a button and then I just follow the output, because I'm completely against that point of view of even playing. Like I wouldn't play this game if I didn't do that. But I think what's interesting too is like I feel like the analytics community also have quite interesting views on differentiating teams, right? And we can talk about concepts like that, like concepts of risk, which I think like we'll probably jump into this in a moment. But like a lot of the Solio content creation has, I think, informed probably more casual viewers as to what those like concepts are and how you can apply that to differentiate yourself from some of the elite managers. Because I think the sort of most basic straw man that most people have is that people who use models have the same team, and we just simply put, that's just not true. And as you say, a lot of people who don't use models end up coming with very close and homogenous teams, but I think probably don't have the same sort of decision-making process. It's interesting too, where some of the players that I speak to who are elite managers, they probably over time have become a little bit less reticent to or more reticent to just following that sort of top output. Because when you try to embrace an analytical approach, in my opinion, you are also trying to understand what actually creates the projection for a certain player over a run of time. Like, okay, you can understand that fixtures will sort of drive, like whether Urian Timber has 5 projected points versus Brentford at home, as opposed to, let's say, 4 projected points versus Chelsea away. Like that's just very intuitive. Like people can understand that's just fixture difficulty. But then I think it's also things like when you actually become a little bit more obsessed with it, you are also thinking about what is a model actually projecting for Urian Timber over a long span of games. Do I actually think that he could be overachieving that, underachieving that? What is driving a model to kind of reach that average expectation? Is there something that's being missed? And I think going back to Solio, that's something that, I mean, if you are that obsessed about it and you think that you can understand, I guess, how the output is made because of the inputs, and you're even feel comfortable like tweaking inputs, because something I do, for example, is I look at market odds. I look at 11FI's odds, who obviously has his own team strength model. I look at other model odds, like, for example, whether Hub has something. Review also shares their sort of kind of advanced team data, Solio as well. You can kind of see like, okay, how do these models rate Arsenal as a team? what is their average clean sheet odds in a certain week, and then you can make an informed decision as well, like with your understanding of the Premier League landscape, the actual data that we have this season. Like, for example, we know that they're probably conceding like a record low expected goals conceded per match, but I think models are still not even at that level where they're sort of predicting that Arsenal are actually that good, right? Because um, it's I think hard to even rationalize how good Arsenal are right now as a defense, just from the underlyings. But then there's always also the flip side of the argument of why models might seem to be slow to react to things. Because I think if you start the season and a few games in, you start to see Leeds and Sunderland perform quite well, you also probably also think, okay, they maintain this level of form. Nottingham Forest last season is a very good example of that too, where I think their underlyings were very poor, and then obviously they fell off at the end of last season. But there's obviously times at which you invest into the team, and that can kind of guide how people feel about the decision making. But I think that the key thing was that there was a point in time where Forest, obviously, in my opinion, were overperforming. But what I think using models helps is that you can kind of visualize, like, okay, this is overperformance, this is underperformance, at least within an acceptable range. But if you don't use models, it's almost like you have to kind of create narratives and you kind of react, I think, with hindsight. So it's like when Forest were falling off, what I would ask someone who doesn't use a model approach and just said they were probably the third or fourth best team in the country at the time is, why would they have fallen off? Or what kind of caused them to stop performing so well? And I think part of it is actually just my approach. Obviously, like, underlyings drive results more so than like actual numbers. So to me, it kind of made sense where they have this sort of yo-yo of being good then being poor. Whereas probably I think people will struggle to, and it goes back to form and fixtures as well, because it's always about how you evaluate, let's say, someone's form and when it ends. Like, for me, Salah last season is a good example of that. But there was a point at which last season he did fall off. But I think it's also the tricky thing of people being obsessed with points and saying that that's like the source of the truth with when you decide for Salah to fall off. Like, I remember as a content creator suggesting that people should consider at the end of last season maybe dropping Salah off your drafts. But the general response to that is, that's just stupid, right? But I think
what was
using
interesting
analytics helps you.
Yeah,
sorry.
What was interesting with Salah last season is it is quite hard to pinpoint, because there was like three things at the time that could have all have played into it. The secured the league title, he signed his big new contract, so he wasn't playing for that, and he was absolutely humbled by Tino Livramento in the cup final, and he's never been the same since, has he? Well, he hasn't though, has he? Which is interesting. So it's like you're talking about narratives there. I mean, I always like to construct a narrative that makes my beloved Newcastle look better, but then since that narrative, I've actually noticed Tino Livramento, and I don't know if the models would reflect this, but not a lot of people that go directly against Tino Livramento are getting returns against Newcastle. At Man City last week, he had Doku in great form, and then Savinho came on, and they did nothing against him. And I don't know if that is a narrative I'm creating, or if that's something that maybe these analytic programs could look at. But it is interesting when you talk about the predictions, because at the minute, obviously Liverpool seem to have still quite decent underlying data. By the underlyings, from what I've seen, this is recorded just before game week 13. From the underlyings, they actually look a great pick on the free hit, because they are outscoring their opponents on the expected goals. However, in reality, they're getting absolutely hammered. I think 10-1 in actual goals. And I mean, I think on a free hit, like you said about the analytics over a period of time, the predictor score, and it kind of pans out. But what I always think with them is where the fall down is predicting that individual haul. Like last week in game week 12, the analytics had Bukayo Saka quite high. My mate sent me a video which has kind of really got me into thinking about all this. It had Bukayo Saka, I think, third or fourth on the projections, and he ended up with 4 points. And then you had Eberici Eze, who was nowhere near Saka on the projections, and he went and got 20 points. Now, over the course of 10, 15 game weeks, you would expect Saka to outscore Eze, maybe even quite comfortably, but would he be able to get that 20-point haul, and would the analytics be able to predict when that sort of thing is coming? I don't know. That's one of the things that kind of puts me off it. If it's like, I can always tell like Saka and Bruno Fernandes and Cole Palmer and Salah and Haaland are going to be good players. They're probably going to be the captain options depending on the fixture. But it's like, if they can't predict the haul, then what's the point?
Yeah, but I guess you also have to think about, so if, let's say, someone who doesn't use analytics is better at predicting hauls, then why are they getting worse results anyways compared to analytics managers? There must be something going wrong, right? Because as you said,
you at 100,000 and me at 3.7
I don't even
million.
think that's even the case. Because I actually think I played better last season, my worst season ever, and I got a 230k finish because I just dialed up my risk appetite, and what I consider risk to be is more like, going against what is genuine effective ownership, and I don't really care about how people like. I would define risk as, let's say, if two players had like the same expected points, I'm almost looking at, a free risk approach is something where I'm looking at picking always the lower owned player so that I can kind of get more of the potential jam because even things go like my way, I don't know, even at least more than 50%, then I'm going to win a lot harder than I would lose or stand to lose. But obviously it didn't work out last season. Whereas the season before, obviously, when you said I got a top 500 finish, I just happened to think I got extremely lucky. I don't think I played particularly well. But that's I know
I'm not having that. I'm not having that.
It hurts you to say that, to hear that, I think. But I think it's because in the past I used to think, okay, my understanding of the game is letting me appreciate when people haul. But I just think, do I watch every single Premier League game enough to even say that? I used to do that during COVID, and I was so confident because I watched almost every match as much as possible, and that kind of made me think, I'm better at predicting things in models. I think I got like a top 50k finish that season, and that's before I used any models at all. But I almost look back and think like sometimes it is just I did catch things like, I don't know, Ben Rama becoming extremely on form, but how many times did I sort of miss out the opportunity where, let's say, I owned Cornet from Burnley for a couple of weeks and he did absolutely nothing, if you remember him.
Yeah, it's a West Ham now, isn't
he? I think back then, like, I'm no analytics manager would have ever owned that, but I felt so cool about owning that. And I guess that there have been a lot of times where I've flopped owning a certain player. But another thing too is I think you just need to kind of visualize, do you actually have that much control over being able to guess individual outcomes for players? Like if you take even like a betting example, no professional gambler actually does player level betting. They don't do, for example, like if someone does NBA betting, they don't do player prop betting. Player prop betting was essentially created by betting houses so that they can just get casual gamblers to just bet on players. Like, for example, if someone's going to get 20 points plus this night. So I think going back to the FPL example, within a singular game week, I would struggle to believe that there are professional gamblers who actually just bet single props and actually are profitable. If anything, from what I can see from professional gamblers, is that they actually tend to do things like look at the money line for a team. Kind of going back to your Liverpool example, right? So, for example, like right now, whilst people are very cold on Liverpool, I think a professional gambler would be actually looking at the line for, let's say, Liverpool versus West Ham and just saying, well, what is the kind of Asian money betting line? So that an Asian money betting line is, for example, that kind of goal difference, the implied goal difference. So let's say when you see Rob T's odds, I guess Liverpool West Ham is going to be something like maybe 2.1 goals to maybe like 1 point something. That's just off the top of my head. So maybe the implied money betting line is going to be like 1.25 for Liverpool, or one for Liverpool. But maybe, let's say, someone using a team strength model could actually have projected the Liverpool game to be like 2.2 versus West Ham's, I don't know, 0.8, which is probably a bit too much, but that could give them, let's say, an implied 1.25, and they would actually bet on that because they think, okay, the markets are overcorrecting on Liverpool a bit too hard here. But my point is to say, yeah, I really think that, and I would challenge anyone to show me that there very consistently good at being able to predict individual holes within a singular game week. I think the point of analytics is you're picking, you own FPL players for a long time in your team. You know, when you invest into someone and you buy someone like Saka, you are owning him, or you're expecting to own him for at least 6 to 8 game weeks at a time. So, and it's okay. Like, he might not just get the dividends in 8 weeks that you expect, right, based on a projected points model. But I think that the point about models is that they're trying to visualize the entire game. So when you're challenging models and how they predict, I think it's almost like if I was looking at the 1,000 players that play in the Premier League and their projected points for an entire season, how good is a projection model capable of projecting, I guess, their points? Because the whole point with FPL2 is we all have different teams. So it's like, in theory, I could shell out a really good team this week, but I can also, for me, from an analytics approach, I can comfortably look at someone else's team and just say they have 6 different players to myself, but I think the projected points is similar. But as you know, the outcome for an individual game week is going to be like, I could get 80 points, he could get 20 points, or vice versa. And
yeah,
that's just something I'm comfortable with.
I saw on Above Average, Adam was saying a stat where he had two players in one of his mini leagues, and there was an expected points difference of 6 points and an actual points difference of 169. Yeah. And that, I mean, that's just crazy to me. That's like something like that's even possible, really. But
yeah. But I think that will happen because you are like one sample. Like, even from a managerial perspective, like, my team is one team out of, I don't know, 10 million managers. It's people are going to be lucky or unlucky in a season. And obviously, I think the main approach or the logic to analytics is like, if you play multiple seasons, it's like the poker example kind of rings true, because it's like, I have 38 hands. If I play 10 years, I've played 380 hands, right? But even if I'm like the best gambler in the world, I mean, in theory, there's going to be a run of games, or like with my poker hands, where I just get unlucky, right? Like, maybe I let's say if I play 1,000 hands, I'm like up 6, I win 600 times, I lose 400 times. There's going to be a streak in there where I maybe lose 22 in a row. But is that because I'm making bad decisions, or is that just because, you know, it's kind of luck of the draw? Like, I personally just don't feel comfortable anymore, like with the experience that I have, that I can predict holes as much as I used to think. But that's, you know, that's for someone to kind of allow themselves to feel powerless about controlling outcomes. Like, I don't manage Aston Villa, so if they concede to Wolves, you know, so be it this weekend. But is it for me a good decision to pick up an Aston Villa defender with a clean sheet this week? I would say so, over even, let's say, someone like Daniel Munoz, just by a margin.
So how would you pick between like a player who has projected points of, say, 4.8 but has a fixture you think might be a bit tougher, versus a player who has a projected points of 4.5 but a fixture that you might think is a little bit easier, where you think maybe the form favours the player slightly projected lower?
Yeah.
How would you pick between them? Like, because that's something I think, like, I look at them, and my mate Gary, who does the FPL Pubcast, he's always like bringing them up on his videos, and it's like, oh, this player gets 3.7 and this one gets 3.4, so I'm just gonna stick with this player. And it's like, well, how can you, like, how do you come up with that minute difference? How do you extrapolate that to actually be worth anything in the real world?
Yeah,
in a game where we get round points, we don't get these like divided points.
Of course, it's true. I think going back to, it's like, if I had to, for me, that's a 50-50 decision in an individual game week. But I think the core of like analytics decision making is like, you are making decisions for the long term. So I guess the fact that you own both of those players in your team must mean that you have confidence in them, generally speaking, like for the next 6 to 8 game weeks plus. And that, you know, that individual decision, I think is not going to be like, I don't think that's going to be an indictment at all. Like, I think if you pick the 4.3 player because you're a little bit more confident in them, and you think maybe the model projections just for that week, for example, a bit too soft, I think that's okay. That's a 5% difference, whether 0.2 over 4.5. That's not anything to me. That's 5% for the individual sort of decision.
Yeah.
But as a percentage of, let's say, your expected points for the week, like 0.2 out of 65 is probably like, or 60 is probably a good expectation for every single week. But I mean, that's once you put it down to that, that's probably what, 0.03%. So then you start to realize that, I think when people kind of make mentions of like the importance of 0.2, it is completely meaningless. You're going to play a season where you're expected to average something like, I don't know, 2,200 points over season, 2,300. So to me, I would just say to anyone, just choose what you want to pick because it's 0.2. It's more about the principles of an analytics decision that would actually be like, if I pick this defender right now who has like 50 projected points versus the 45 projected points, like that 5 points adds up if I was going to pick one player or the other as a transfer decision for me. Like that's where I think the kind of debate starts to be a bit more interesting. That 0.2 for me, I think people obsess too much about it, even within analytics. Like people think, like the wind will move it 0.2. Like if you log into the same website the next morning, it could be 0.2 the other way. And what are you going to do? You're going to say that's like a biblical sort of decision. No, it's not. To me.
I mean, the thing is, 0.2 would round down to 0 anyway if we're doing whole
that's
numbers.
Exactly
so
it. Yeah, even from a modeling perspective, I think people have mentioned to me like anything that goes into like double digits, like as in 0.0 something, like you just forget about it. Like that. We have no control over anything. But yeah, I think even if you did 0.02, multiply that 38 times, that's still negligible compared to some of the other decisions that we're trying to make. And I think more, as I said, medium to long-term decisions. Captaincy is an interesting one, I suppose. But that's, for me, I think it's just about making decisions that kind of enable you to get long-term points gain, as opposed to get like for me, I think like your example, if you're confident in the 4.3, I would tell you every time to just pick the 4.3 player. But if you were struggling to pick and you pick the 4.5, I think that's a fair approach and usage of a model, right? Because you're stuck on these two players. But there's also other considerations, which I think are quite interesting. Like, for example, I would actually look at effective ownership of those players. I'd probably say, if I think this is a true 50-50, I'm struggling mentally, my risk-based approach probably suggests that I pick whoever is lower owned because I'm willing to take on that risk. Now, one thing that I've struggled with as a content creator is I think as I applied a lot of risk last season, and I think I kind of sent my rank from like 100K to like 200K because I took much more risk than I needed to, or not needed to, but I think this is hindsight, right?
But did you feel more alive when you did it? Did you feel like
I feel super comfortable in making the decision, but it is painful every week, like thinking about I'm going to record a YouTube video to my audience and they're just going to see that I'm constantly getting red arrows. Like I think usually what happens at the end of an FPL season, right, when you're an engaged manager, is you expect more green arrows because you think the casual crowd, yada, yada, is going to make worse decisions. And here I am, like for the first season ever, like where at the back half of the season, like almost every decision I make is wrong and I'm getting red arrows. But because I'm trying to dial up my risk, it's making it even worse. Like I chose to actively ignore free at 34 so I could go 3 at 35 because I knew I'd say like 80% of the crowd would do 3 at 34. So it's a good opportunity to sidestep that and take that on. But as I found out, obviously as a YouTube content creator, it's like, what approach do I eventually want to do? Like, would I rather have a better average rank or a little bit more of a yo-yo like structure, like kind of like I don't know. I'm someone like Late Riser has like sort of very variable ranks, right? Where he's had some great finishes, some pretty poor ones. And I'm on that track now, and I'm sort of reevaluating that too, because I think like if I look at someone like Harry, who it's not a criticism, but he does play it quite safe when you look at his structure. So it's like, do I want like the chance to get another top 500 season like that? Or is it better actually just like comfortably getting top 10, 20Ks, knowing that I think I'm obsessed enough about this game to play and get consistently good average ranks? That's something that I've been deliberating myself. Like, do I want my acceptable range of finishes to be like 10 to 50K, or do I want it to be like 500 to 200,000 in the worst case scenario, like I had last season?
Well,
but I think
I would go for top 1 to top 1 million, and it's
but that's the thing. So I think I can't. I would love to win, and I'm playing to win every season.
You have to,
but
you have to feel alive.
But then I just kind of think about it too. It's like I can see there are other content creators who are not comfortable making or taking risky decisions. Like I think the amount of time I went against Salah last season as a captain, people would just chalk it down to being stupid. But I think I took him on probably at least like 7-8 times, and it didn't work at all.
Yeah.
But like those are things I'm comfortable doing with my process. But that's the thing at the end of the day. Like, are you comfortable with it, right? And it's the same thing with using models.
Yeah. Well, that actually brings me to another one of my questions, which is like one of my issues this season has been making overly emotional calls, particularly surrounding Newcastle players, but part of me also feels this helps balance my emotions surrounding the game, because I do get quite invested in the game, perhaps too invested. And I do struggle with it sometimes. Like this week, which is game week 13, I've sold my favourite player, Big Dan Burn, and I've brought in Nico O'Reilly. And I do think it's probably, if I use logic and step aside from my emotions, I think over a period of time, there's obviously risk with O'Reilly, because there always is with a Guardiola player. But I just think the fixture run, the scores he's putting up, and the expected data as well, I just think it all favours O'Reilly, knowing that I have Senesi on the bench if he does miss out. And this is me trying to apply more logic and less emotion to my decisions. But honestly, I do feel quite sad about it, because I feel like I'm almost betraying Big Dan Burn by getting rid of him, because I do think he could score against Everton, he could keep a clean sheet, but Newcastle have been poor away from home. But also I've done things like take a hit to sign Nick Pope when I had a perfectly good goalkeeper, and I've captained Anthony Gordon against Liverpool and he got sent off, and these moves haven't worked out. So what I'm wondering is, for an emotional player like myself, the big worry is that using analytics and programs will actually lessen the emotions surrounding to the game, to the point where it feels a bit less fun, like it's not the same game anymore, and perhaps even clinical. It's like a clinical scientific approach rather than that kind of roller coaster that I do perhaps enjoy a bit too much. But so I suppose what I'm asking is, how has analytics affected your emotions surrounding FPL?
I don't know. I think it helps me. It helps me settle down, because when you make the decision, I think in your head, as I said, if you look at a projected points thing, it's like sometimes, like last week, I had the choice of either going just Daniel Munoz from Gabriel, or the move that I made, which was go Chris Richards and then actually upgrade Enzo to Mbemo. So now I'm down 18 points. But I think in the past I probably would have crashed out, like never before.
It's quite interesting
honest,
that, if I can just interrupt, it's quite interesting that, because Enzo Fernandez, I was reading, has got the highest projected, the highest non-penalty expected goals involvement from a midfielder, and then you've sold him before Burnley. Is that what you said? I might have misheard that.
That's exactly what I did.
So for an analytics manager, what makes you sell the highest non-penalty expected goal involvement player against Burnley?
Well, I did sell him for the second highest expected points player. But I mean, expected goal.
So that's a good answer.
Second goal involvement. But also, from an analytical perspective, it's like you also have to kind of level set, right? So if someone's leading the pack in terms of underlying stats, I don't think the models would suddenly just be like, okay, Enzo's the number one, then Mbemo was number two. Like, the reasons why someone like Mbemo were better for me is because when I tend to make decisions as a manager, I tend to think, okay, I can suffer this week, but actually, am I generally more comfortable with making the decision to have gone for Mbemo last week, where he was going to get a price rise, Enzo seemingly was going to get a price drop. Enzo's minutes could have probably been around 80 minutes because maybe he needed to get subbed off for Barcelona. Obviously, I got that wrong. But sort of my decision making was, that's probably my last chance to get Mbemo. It's still a good fixture. The expected points was actually very similar. Obviously, Everton kind of shut United out regardless, and obviously it looks a lot worse in hindsight. But for me, it was like my last chance to get Mbemo. Most engaged managers don't have the chance to get him because they don't have the same team value as me. And going back to analytics, I have a very different approach to other analytics managers. I am very team value oriented as a player. I like amassing team value so that I can almost outpoint people, hopefully at the back half of the season, just on team value alone. But the way I saw it was, it is a luxury move, but it was my last chance to get Mbemo. So if I had delayed until 14, I probably wouldn't get there, and Enzo would still be a sell for me on 14, where the Chelsea fixture run gets worse. So the way I see it too is also, like, if Chelsea had an amazing fixture run, it does make sense that Chelsea players are top on that list, right? If you look at per 90s, like Garnacho, Estevao, even maybe even Neto is like quite high up there. But is it actually possible that Chelsea have all the best attackers, or is it because as a symptom of some of the better fixtures that they've had, all the players are kind of high up there in those ranks, and you expect them to perform a little bit worse over, worse fixtures. And so for me, I made a decision on a week where it's like a net nothing, but because of transfer value and things like that, I kind of feel comfortable. Okay, game week 14, I can level set. Mbemo plays West Ham, Enzo plays Leeds away. That's still a much better game for Mbemo, and so on and so forth, right? Where if maybe I stepped back into 14 and not and maybe I didn't make transfers, there's a pretty reasonable world where I don't get to Mbemo with my team value, because if I made the Munoz move as well, I just simply can't afford someone like Mbemo, and my team will be completely different. So something that I'm accepting is that maybe over the next few weeks I can win on net. Like I don't really see it as a bad decision for 1 week because it went so poorly. I'd like to see the next 5 to 6 weeks of that decision, because I would have gone on different separate lines of teams, and I also have to accept that those were like close moves for me. So do I feel so bad when there's an 18-point swing when I was obsessing about making one move or the other the night before? No, I just tend to think, that's just slightly bad luck, right? And going back, I guess.
Do you think that's as much the using the analytics to offset the decision? Or do you think that's like you as a person, your personality? Do you think that
it could be
you are better at handling this variance than someone like myself?
I think it's more like I couldn't even really understand like why things were happening. It's like I think when you play competitively and you want to win, it's like you just that's all you really want. So at the end of the day, I guess I have a fallback in terms of being able to understand like what happened in the Premier League game that made it so poor for my FPL team, right? So I still emotionally react to FPL because to me, I want to be as successful as possible in FPL. So when I have a bad week, and I think even last week is a bad week because, the move that I was delivering against, it was obviously 18 points up. And obviously I'd rather be 18 points up. So it's devastating when I see like some of my other friends who probably did a similar move, like just went to Munoz, and they have Enzo as well, because Enzo's a pretty popular analytics pick. Like that's just devastating to me. Like I can't really recover from that.
I can tell you what you should do is grab your camera and go for a nice walk and record a raw reaction walking video.
What I tend to do is I just spend most of the weekend just telling my wife it's a bad week. It's a bad week, and I'm just gonna be feeling bad. So just leave me alone. But this is me as an analytics manager. But in the past, I guess I would have just felt bad. And then
not knowing why.
I'd probably even have that decision like ride in my mind like going forward. So what I think it helps with is like the next week I just think, oh, I've still got a great team on paper, like I'm free hitting now, so that's separate. But like I think what I'm saying is like with Mbemo game week 14, great, another opportunity for my team to do well because I know it's a good team. Because I think Ben Crellin actually said it best. I read it one time when someone was shitting on him sorry.
You're all right.
But where someone was sort of like reacting harshly to a decision that he made in like just an FPL decision. And he literally just responded, I don't make bad decisions. And
I remember that.
No, but I think I really do subscribe to that, because it's like, if for me, both of the moves were great moves. So the fact that one didn't go so well is just bad luck to me, and I can accept that. But yeah, emotionally I think I still take it very harshly. I don't have a very good sort of mental approach to bad results. Like last season, I didn't even respond to my YouTube comments for the second half of last season because I was just really struggling with the results. And yeah, I don't really know. But it allows me to separate the decision making from reacting to the outcome.
I suppose
I'm
as
still
well
as emotional to football as ever.
I suppose as well, if you're doing it based on the projection over a few game weeks, you've always got that. Well, we'll see how it plays out, and
but
then
it
by
can
the
still
time
just be bad, right?
Yeah, well,
or after 6 weeks.
I mean, would you say captain and Anthony Gordon against Liverpool was a bad decision? I mean, I did think he'd have a lot of chances. I thought the game, Semenyo just scored twice. I thought the game would play into Gordon's style of play, and he had 3 glorious chances moments before his red card. But would you say that was like a stupid risk, or do you think that was a worthy gamble that just didn't come off?
Well, now knowing that he was actually on penalties at the time, I don't think it was crazy. But I suppose the it's weird because
I feel
we've
the
now
way
seen
Liverpool have played since has
Yeah.
really like
No, I know.
justified
So
the call.
it looks better, but that's an interesting thing in terms of like, do we think Liverpool are progressively getting worse, or have they always been this bad from game week 2? Is a question that I will struggle with, because like if we're to kind of do the whole sort of the reassessment of like the decision, I think one thing that models help me understand is that like we have an evolving understanding of a team, right? So I guess on paper that was a pretty poor decision back then from, let's say, an expected points approach, but actually in hindsight you actually have a couple net benefits. Like, Liverpool got worse, so maybe your intuition on Liverpool was good, and also Anthony Gordon's on penalties, which at the time I don't think people were fully confident that he was. But then actually the Walter transfer wasn't even done at the time, right?
No, it wasn't.
So actually, so we knew he was on penalties.
But
So
there was always the risk that Fabian Schär could have taken them as well, because
true,
he's taken
yeah,
them. But Gordon was
yeah.
the favourite for them.
That's true. So I guess it comes down to things like that. But it's like, are you like, sometimes when I think about things like that, it's like if you knew Liverpool were that bad, if you looked at all 20 teams in the table, were you absolutely certain that you'd have thought the right way about those 20 teams? Because it's like you kind of need to check yourself with decision making in terms of like, if you were sure that you were more right than models about Liverpool, were you more right about all the other teams in the Premier League than a model? Or was that maybe just the 1 week where I guess your bias took over? And I think that's something you need to consider, right, as well.
Well, it's something I'm considering very, very strongly. Like, and I'm trying to counter it by obviously selling Dan Burn this week. And
Well,
like,
also,
we don't know how that's going to come out, but I mean, it would just be typical that it backfired. But even if it does go wrong,
I think it is a good
week,
decision. Yeah,
it doesn't mean it's the wrong move.
I agree.
But
And as I said, you'll probably enjoy O'Reilly over the next few weeks. Like, I remember
I
Guardiola
won't if Dan Burn scores on Saturday.
No, it's fine.
But then I don't think I would have played Burn anyway, so it's not the end of the world.
And there'll be other Saturdays where Nico O'Reilly plays, right? So I guess, yeah, I mean, like, for example, like I've done decisions like, minus 4 Guardiola into a clean sheet loss, and then suddenly he just scores like 5 goals in 3 games. Like that's kind of what I mean by you can make good decisions and just realize that the fruits of it come a little bit later, because that's kind of the point of playing a fantasy game. And going back to your point about like single game week hauls, like there are daily fantasy games where people just bet on singular games, but the people who actually tend to win them still kind of do things like they bet entirely against one result. So going back to the free hit argument this week, like I think a lot of people do tend to criticize me where they're saying, why are you backing only 4 teams? Well, I think if I back 10 teams, then I almost need 10 different results to go my way, as opposed to 4 different results to go my way. I mean, which one's more likely, right? Am I going to get 10 players right, or roughly speaking, like 4 teams right, and that's going to give me a higher ceiling? So, yeah, there are arguments about like things like that I find aren't discussed too much.
One of the things about the free hit that I always think is an interesting one is something Praz talked about, and Praz obviously is heavily involved in Solio, which is the program I'm looking at most using. And what he was talking about is stacking. And I feel like it's a good opportunity in free hit. Like you say about picking 4 teams to do well. Well, you only need to pick like 1 defense to do well if you pick 3 players from them. Is that something that you would be interested in, or would you say that's just too much?
Yeah, 100%. Well, I think people have actually done studies about it, right? So it's like when you're dealing with that 50-50, that 4.3, 4.5 example, some things I'd consider is like, do I have another defender from that team? Because actually, if I truly believe 4.3 and 4.5 is the numbers, because sometimes it's also driven by minutes, right? Like you might have an underappreciation for someone's minutes that can really blow up the argument. But let's say I had Raya and Urian Timber was 4.3 and someone else was 4.5. Well, I tend to just want to stack, as well, because it's like it's more likely that I can back one result to go my way, and then I can do better with that. So I'd probably pick Urian Timber 4.3, because people have done studies where I think, you tend to get a small expected value gain by backing a double defense or backing a double offense, but that's obviously lower quality because offense is a bit more scattered, right? Like Gordon can get a haul. It doesn't mean Barnes is going to get a haul as well, or Bruno Guimaraes is going to get a haul. But I think with the Newcastle example, I did want to mention, don't feel too bad about it, because Newcastle is a bit of a weird team where they performed really well for a couple of games and then really poorly. And it's kind of like that Nottingham Forest example last season, where it's like, do I think that the managers who owned them for the good run are amazing and the ones who owned them for the poorish run are bad? No, I think to me, that's just bad luck. And I still think that that's kind of the case with some of your Newcastle transfers, because they've played really poorly. But would anyone have ever bet that they would have done poorly after how they started the season? I don't think so. Like at least not to the extent that they have. So I just think, don't feel too harsh about it, because that's the thing. You can't control how teams could perform. That's also why I don't like sample sizes of last 6 games, because it's meaningless to me. I don't think having 6 games of sample would give me a better prediction of the next 6 games than the last 20 or 30, to be honest. I'd feel much more comfortable the last 30.
Would you be happier finishing top 20k, say, as a figure, top 20k, 20k in the world, but you've gone purely model driven, or would you prefer to finish 200k, but you've had your favourite players all season and they've given you moments of joy throughout that season?
Definitely 20k, because I mean, my favourite players are the ones that get me points. So
yeah. I suppose though, you're Spanish, I believe, aren't you? Yeah. So it's maybe a bit different for you. But if you were doing like if you were doing fantasy La Liga, and would you and you're a Real Madrid fan, I think, aren't you?
Yeah.
Would you ever pick Messi over Ronaldo?
Yeah, I mean, like I'm not a Real Madrid fan. That's stupid. So I think Messi's the greatest player of all time.
So who do you support?
Oh, I do support Real Madrid.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, of course I'd pick Messi every time. He's like the best player.
Would you pick Puyol or Sergio Ramos for on a free hit? You know,
I mean, I'd pick Ramos because I do love him.
He's a spicy player, like.
But
right.
He also has more goal threat, So maybe like if I was a stats man back then, I could back it on that. He has penalty share, all the things that analytics managers love. But yeah.
One thing I do find quite difficult with FPL, and this is not necessarily to do with analytics, but when like my players, like Newcastle players, do well and I don't own them, and they're highly owned elsewhere. Yeah. So like there was a while where Anthony Gordon, a few game weeks ago, everyone, best get Gordon in, he's on penalties. And I'm thinking to myself, if he scores, it's going to hurt me in the FPL. So I'm almost like kind of rooting for him to be the assister of the assist rather than actually... Like, how would you handle something like that? Because it's something I do struggle with. Like last year I benched Lewis Hall, and then he went and got 3 assists in a game, and like one of my mini league rivals had him, and I'm like furious every time Lewis Hall did something. It's like, cut it back to somebody else to set it up there, and it's like I find that hard. I do. People say I'm daft. Oh, just celebrate your team, but like my FPL team is my team as well.
I think it's okay to like emotionally react to FPL or want certain things. It is like an irrational feeling, but like we all have it. As I said, I think it just helps maybe like just being comfortable that you don't, like whether you start or bench Hall isn't going to like change his performance in the match. Yeah. Like you might want to think that, but it just simply won't, right? Like I tend to always have to just remind myself that, I don't have control of these players. And
Right.
Like I benched a couple Halls last season too. I think I benched him versus United. And I did the same with Munoz, and well, United were just bad, weren't they? But yeah.
Right, I've got a couple more questions. I'm aware we're pushing on for time, and I don't want to hold you up too much. There's a part of me, rightly or wrongly, that feels like using analytics programs is cheating, or at least not in the spirit of the game. Is this something you had to wrestle with when you first started using them, or do you think my emotions are misplaced? And if you did feel this way, how did you overcome it?
I think it's weird because, as I said, with that gaming approach, I think, like, for example, like I used to play games where, you had to find such random resources to get better. Like you'd have to read very obscure forum posts. People weren't streaming at the time, so I couldn't see like what the best player in the world was doing. Like nowadays, when you watch like competitive games, you can see the best players in the world play. You can see like what mechanics they're using. There are websites that support you in making decisions. Across the board. And I think, that's kind of how the landscape will change. And if other people are using other resources and it's helping them make better decisions or do better, and it's available, I will always tend to lean to I want to use them myself. So I've never viewed it as cheating, to be honest. Uh, do I feel like it's completely changed my view in the game? Absolutely. I actually don't respect managers in the same way that I did. I used to think people who have amazing ranks were just the best, but I now almost think it's like, yeah, some of these managers are very lucky, or some of these managers are very lucky to have actually used models for a bit longer than myself. Like if I have been using models, if I learned things better, like I'm sure a lot of my average ranks would be much better, but like everyone in their own time, I guess. And I just think, yeah, I just jumped on the boat late. I still think, for example, like my view or play style in the game is still very strong. Like from an Annex perspective, I still think people have really poor conceptions of like minutes of certain players. And so whilst they make decisions that are backed by the models, they don't think about things like tweaking the minutes in the right way. They don't think tactically about um, you know, what is like Pep's certain preference for a player, and what allows for a player to suddenly start 6 games in a row for Pep, um, versus so sometimes there are opportunities. I think what's a good example of this? Like in previous years, Guardiola's minutes on certain models would be very low, but I would be super confident that his minutes would be 90, 90, 90 every match, which actually would mean that I would go on a different path. And I think those are opportunities where I think, yeah, I tend to see things a little bit ahead of other managers because I think quite obsessively about minutes and I try to think more about upside. And those are the kind of things that I think about. Whereas some managers, I think, would, let's say, bring on a player who I feel like has shaky minutes. I don't really want to name examples because I'm not here to like denigrate managers, but I think, yeah, people
give us
just
some controversy.
let's see. I won't name a manager, but I'm trying to think about like what is a recent decision where I think people made a really poor move.
Rooter,
Um,
start of the season.
but I think he got decent minutes, to be honest. It's just he actually
Van Dijk in game week 13.
Well, I have owned Van Dijk for much longer, so let's not talk about that. No, but well, I mean, yeah, he could be a poor decision, but I'm trying to think just in terms of like minutes and sort of projections. I think, uh, hmm, I still think like even like sort of the obsession around João Pedro just generally over the season has been like, yeah, I mean, I've never seen so much outrage for such a mediocre player.
Well, I tell you a good one, Joachim Anderson. Like he lights the touch paper of the non-analytics crowd. Oh, they've only got Anderson because of
That's true. I've been told that Anderson's a shit pick every week, and he kind of saved my week last week as a model sub. So,
well, this is it. Yeah. I mean, the fact is he is getting the DEFCONs quite regularly, and I often think of these DEFCON players as being like perfect subs because, like, the reason I kept Senesi over Burn is because at home he's averaging 0.47 expected goals conceded, and away from home he's hit the DEFCONs in every match. Now, like you say, over a 6-game thing, it's not really a great projection, but the sort of fixtures that might swing when he plays the teams he's played at home, when he plays them away, and then he might start getting the DEFCONs at home when he plays the tougher opponents at home. So that was what I went for with why I went for Senesi, because he's a perfect substitute. Because if Nico O'Reilly does miss out, there's always going to be a chance that he can get 3 points rather than 2 or 4 points rather than 1.
Yeah.
So, and I feel like Joachim Anderson is one of those players, like a perfect sub that can step in when necessary against anyone.
Yeah, and honestly, Fulham's defense have always been good last few seasons. So it's like my expectation going forwards is that he'll just continue to do better, as opposed to someone who like looks at the start, like the woeful sort of run that Fulham started the season with, and thought that would be like how they would perform for the rest of the season. Like I would still be the type of manager who would be betting up on them like 6 game weeks ago, as opposed to someone who just thinks, yeah, they're just going to maintain what they've done.
Well, my mate is going to call me out if I don't address this. You were saying about Fulham having a good defence last season. Now, this is quite a tough one because they were 5th for expected goals conceded, but they only kept 5 clean sheets. So how would you say that was a good defence from an FPL perspective when they're conceding in 33 matches?
Yeah, I mean, this to me just goes back down to there are going to be seasons where you concede a lot more goals than you should. But I think the main struggle that I have is like, yes, of course, it probably comes down to there were individual players making mistakes, right? Like I think last season, I can't remember many good Leno saves from that season. I've seen like silly mistakes from like Castagna, who had to play for Tete for a bit. But what I think is that it's more likely that the expected goals conceded for the next season are driven by last year's expected goals conceded than, let's say, them conceding 54 goals, right? Because I think they can, like, their XGC was maybe like 48 or something like that. So it's like, do I think the defense is actually driven by the goals that they've been let in or the expected goals conceded in the past? And so, like, now, if because they have a couple cleans now, right? They've like maybe 3 clean sheets. So I guess, like, even using that as a basis, like, are we saying that something's dramatically changed for the defense? Like, I don't think so. I just think it's like, you can't really predict when someone's going to make a stupid mistake. Like, even Arsenal defense is quite similar. Like, the defense, other than, let's say, Calafiori coming in for Miles Lewis-Kelly, which I don't think is a huge defensive difference. I guess it would be Mendy, Partey. It's a separate discussion. But like, they also underperformed massively Arsenal's clean sheet. So were we expecting them to underperform again this season? No, but were we also expecting? But what they've done actually is they've overperformed in terms of the clean sheet so far already, but then also kind of just completely, obliterated the underlying stats expectations that we have for them. So I just think you can't use the. I still am someone who's like more driven towards XG. Like, there are studies that suggest that a lot of teams and their XG were better for predicting the points of a team within the league table, like going forwards, than the goals and the goals conceded. And I still stick by that with players, with mostly teams as well. But I totally appreciate, like, even with players, like, you can bring into arguments things like, okay, what if someone's a bad finisher? But models do account for that. Or what if someone's a good finisher? That too. So I feel like it doesn't. We're not trying to simplify things, I guess, by using an analytics approach. You're also trying to make sure you take everything into consideration, but I guess in a fair way where you're not overcorrecting or undercorrecting every single week. Which is why you'll see like team ratings don't move that quickly, but obviously the league table moves up and down. You can't suddenly have like a tier list in the Premier League that changes every single week. A team model will move much slower. But
don't you have a tier list in the Premier League that changes every single week?
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess mentally in my head I do, right? I kind of think, oh wow, like
the cheat sheet.
Lead, yeah. I mean, I have a cheat sheet as well.
I love the cheat sheet. It's a great show.
Yeah, it's like a couple.
I would say, just to interrupt, I would say if you don't watch a lot of Fran, and I'm sure more of you watch Fran than you do me, but if you don't, at least try and check out the cheat sheet every week, because it's a great 20 minutes that'll make your decisions a lot better. So
yeah, thank you. But I make mistakes there too. Like, I remember, like, I put Gordon on the cheat sheet, and I was like, what the hell was that 60-minute sub the first time he like came back from one of the Champions League games, and I had to immediately dock him down. And I guess, like, some people would respond like, why would you react so harshly? But I just think I didn't anticipate that his minutes could be so poor within one individual match. It'll happen again, I'm sure of it. So I have.
He's causing problems for both of us this season, Anthony Gordon, couldn't he?
but I think, like, that's kind of part of it too. It's like, you can, like, I guess I have an updating sort of mind map of like how I feel teams are, but then there are some pretty big results. Like even 2 or 3 games can drive like my expectations very, very wildly. Like Leeds, a couple of away games that they've played, they've been shocking on defense, and suddenly that they, I don't feel so comfortable saying that they're like a top half defense anymore. And maybe they're not, even in terms of like stats, but like, things can move very, very quickly. And part of it's just, we don't have enough sample size for certain teams as well. And you just need to you need to accept over the course of the season, like your judgments on players will change, and your judgment on teams will change. And I think what models help with is just, as I said, level setting that change, like not allowing you to go from like Liverpool's like the worst team in the country because of the last 3 results, and sort of allowing yourself to still pick Liverpool players on the free hit is for me a good example of that. I will be picking Liverpool players on my free hit, regardless of whether that goes wrong.
Would you say it's getting to the point where it's impossible to be a great FPL manager without using some sort of projection model?
I think so. Are we just including like if you look at like odds and stuff like that?
Well, we can go from Rob T's numbers to FPL Review to Solio to the Hub model, the tools that they have on Hub.
Yeah. What about just like if I was using like FBref and I was looking at underlying stats for players and things like that?
Well, like XG.
Yeah.
Well, that's on the website, isn't it? So, like, if you're talking about like the kind of spirit of the game, it's on the actual website. And it, like, I suppose anything that enhances it outside of that would, but specifically, we'll say something like Rob T's numbers, FPL review, Solio, Fantasy Football Hub, even Scout, if you really want to go that far. Although I don't know a lot about Scout. Would you say it's getting to the point where it's impossible to be a great manager without these tools?
No, I wouldn't say so. But I almost think you need to be quite obsessive about it. Like you almost would probably have, like, over 10 years, right? We're talking about, like, because someone can get rank 1 this season, and I don't think, like, I might still think that they're not a good manager because their next few ranks could be like 280k, 380k, and I just generally think maybe their play doesn't have any sense to it. Can I say that?
Yeah, that's fine. Like,
if we're talking over 10 seasons, I feel like you need to have, I do think you should be, roughly speaking, using an analytical approach. I don't think you need any of the data sources, though, because I personally think if I use the stats on the website with what I know now, with how I like, because as I've told to you privately in the past, like, I've created models privately for the international game, so I kind of know, like, how to create a model. I know how to build a team strength model as well. Like, if I had publicly available data and I was just locked in a room for the rest of the time, and you're just watching, that I'm blocked from using Twitter and Review and Solio and Hub and all these sites, I'd be pretty confident I could do well.
Just from, like, expected goals and what's on the website. It's interesting that, because now I'm thinking, well, do I need these programs, or can I just, like, can I do it my own way and attack? But then I'm thinking, one thing that you have said is that the way, like, they kind of aggregate all the data and produce, like, an output. I mean, it's funny. It's really quite funny, because I am, I did a degree which I finished last year, and it was in psychology, and I had to use a lot of statistical programs for my degree work, and it's like, I was fine using the statistical programs then, so why am I so anti them? Like, I can't remember what it was called.
I think that's a fair point. Do you have an answer to that, or?
Well, I don't, now I think about it. It's like, if I want to be, like, serious in, like, why is it okay to, why am I doing a degree in something using it? Because I could have done something. I could have done my degree using interviews. I could have done it using like case studies, but I chose the statistical model, and I did very well. So why am I against it for FPL? It doesn't.
I guess
really...
why do you think it's cheating? Like, because it, like, even if to ask me that question, you must in some way think it is, right?
I do. Well, I said that earlier. I do. Part of me does. I feel like you used a gaming example earlier. Can you remember? You may be too young to remember back in the day. You're certainly youthful looking enough, compared to me. But do you remember, like, Game Genies?
No, I don't.
Oh, on, like, the Super Nintendo, it used to be, you'd have the cartridge, and then there was a Game Genie, and you'd plug the cartridge into the Game Genie, and then plug the Game Genie in, and it would allow you to, like, input codes and, like, cheat codes. I suppose Grand Theft Auto, when you have, like,
I've done stuff like that when I get, like, the Pokemon that I couldn't catch and stuff like that. But
but would you say that was cheating? Like, Football Manager, would you say it's cheating to go use on Football Manager to look at the editor to see which players had the highest potential ability?
Yeah, for me, that's cheating. But I like, but also, like, what's wrong with cheating, I suppose.
That is, that is the quote I'm going to lead this interview with. It is cheating, like, but what's wrong with cheating? This is what I'm trying to say.
So, like, I have used the editor for some saves, right, where, I just want to create the best team possible. But then I've also, like, religiously, like, made sure that I don't use the editor for, like, potential ability scouting. Like, where if I'm doing, like, a save from, like, Vanarama up, like, I'm not going to use cheats. It's like, sometimes, like, something I did last summer, because I was so bored, because they, decided not to release a game for 2 years because they're a rubbish company, I was so bored. I've played so much of 24 that what I found was that you know how they kind of found the training exploit where you could just train pace and acceleration, and the players would be like the best versions of themselves in game. So I just, like, found all these, like, high PA players and then ran like a very aggressive training regime where they were just training pace and acceleration, and then all the other stats would naturally grow like a regular player. And they were like the best. Like I was getting like some of the craziest results I've ever seen. My friend of mine also did the same save with Malta, where he was just kind of like, you're trying to limit test, but it's like, what are you playing the game for? I suppose. What are your goals? I think just being open and honest with just like knowing that, almost like I almost think people watching YouTube videos, right? Like maybe there's 400, 500,000 engaged managers in the world. In some form or way, they're all influenced by people who use models, right? Like Andy very clearly uses models. He has 500,000 subs.
Yeah.
You're already cheating at that point, in my opinion, by watching him.
Well, a good example is my mate D-Unit. He is very anti-cartel. He's like modelled his entire personality around it the last couple of months.
Right.
But everything he does is a response to what everybody else is doing.
Right.
So by that very standard, he is as influenced by these programs as anybody, I would say, because they're shaping the entire way he's viewing the game, which is kind of what I was trying to say a bit earlier. But I'll just, sense. If he's still watching at this stage, I'm happy to call him out. But
I think it's very hard to blur the lines, and I think, as I said, because like it's not. I personally just don't think it's cheating because it's openly available. Sure, obviously some resources actually do cost money, and I think that's something we can discuss. But as I said, like you can still, if obsessed about it enough, like even approach it yourself for free and take the learnings from what a model can do. Like something that I've tried to think about is just how does a model get to a result, and then think about myself like how can I, like when is the time that I disagree with the modeling output, right? And are there instances where models are slow to adapt? But I think you almost have to be like, I have to look at everything, single midfielder in the game, and say, why specifically do I think Foden's overrated by models? And I have to be very honest with myself, or things like that. So it's trying to take into account that it's just not your own team, that it's like thinking about all the teams in the league, how you think they'll perform, and then the players within that team. That's a lot of players. And so one FPL season of one FPL manager is like rolling a dice a couple times, as opposed to, the millions and millions of dice that get rolled. So I just think, yes, of course we want to do well, but we understand it's a bit irrational, right? It's like, I don't think there's a single manager in the world who I'm convinced can play FPL perfectly over the next 10 to 15 years that like another manager, couldn't find out or couldn't figure out like what they're doing, because we have almost advanced to a point where we know too much, I think, about sort of predicting future results. Because in the past, for example, like it could have been cheating just, using a site like FBref, right? When people were still just looking at scores. Like now we have websites, you go online, you search a football score, the XG in the match immediately. Like that, is more information that we've gotten ever. And it's helped us to build all these models. And as I said, like even with clubs, it's like, do you think your club is cheating if they hire a data analyst? I don't think so. I would hope my club hires a data analyst.
Well, yeah. This is it. This is kind of the moral conundrum in my head. Is it cheating, or is it just the advancing of the game? Like, Sam Allardyce at Bolton, he brought in a lot of the sports scientists and everyone laughed at him at first, but then now they all do it and it's just kind of accepted. And I don't know, I am torn. But if I was to use them, like I would want to do it like you described, not as kind of like a safety net, but as a means to attack the kind of common conception and like the common squads that form the template, if you will. How would you say is the best way to use an analytics program like Solio to attack the template? Like how would you use it to find those differentials?
Yeah, well, I think Solio has tools that help you kind of dial up the risk in your decisions, right? And risk is kind of correlated to the effective ownership of players, like within like, the template of the game. So I think, if you're someone who kind of like wants to make decisions that are better for your team in terms of like increasing the average expectations of points, but also wants to dial up the risk, I think you can kind of look at a lot of that are sort of risk-based tools and think about that, right? And you can choose your own battles too, because it's like, if you want to take on risk every week, you just don't captain Haaland. But is that logical? No, because it goes back to the projected points thing of like what risks you're willing to take. For me, I'm more someone who's like willing to take on risks like when they're more like 50-50s and people have similar projected points. But there's also managers who are even more aggressive. Like I remember at the start of the season, no model would have dared to predict that Salah was going to be, as bad as he is now. And Haaland was not as well rated as he is now either, right, from a modeling standpoint. So there were some managers who took the aggressive approach at the start of the season, like some really sort of smart risk-based managers like Trout and FPL
Yes.
Calm.
It's Trout that's really opened my mind to this, because my mate sent me a video of him, and like the quote that stood out was, he said, if I was like, this is from like his wildcard in game week 12 or game week 11, I can't remember which one. And what he said was, if I was top 200 in the world, I'd be going Salah over Haaland right now, because that's where I think the gains could lie, like kind of almost irrespective of the models. And I thought, this is a different sort of analytics approach that I hadn't considered in the past. And maybe now this is like, this bloke, this Trout, who I've literally seen one video of, has kind of had this massive, profound impact on the way that I view these models, in a way that, like, like you say, people like yourself, people like Harry, they've used these programs for years. They've had these killer ranks, and it's not really tempted me. But this Trout saying, I'm going to use this model to highlight the differences, highlight the potential gains, is what's opened my mind so much.
Yeah, the reason why I mentioned that is because, like, I think it fits well with how, like, when I watch your vlogs, I can kind of tell that that's how you'd like to play, right? Like finding a way that is against what most people are doing, but still generally putting out good, like on paper, setting yourself up with the expectation of putting out a good result, if I can say that. Whereas, like, obviously on some of the weeks where you take, like, let's say -14 or -18, I'll have to sort of, plead the -12 or -16. Like I'll have to plead the fifth. Like if you were to ask me if that's a good decision. However, I have taken a -16 in the past with using models, by the way.
But what my argument with that is, if I can call the blanks, like say I made take 4 hits, signed 5 new players in a -16.
Yeah.
If I was able to predict all those 5 players that are sold were to blank, then I've maybe lost 10 points, so that's 26 points. But now I've got 5 players to score 26 points, and I've increased my opportunity of, like last week, it was Munoz that got 14 points. And it was Timber got 5 points. Maybe another week it would be the other way around. If I'm only bringing in one of them, I'm putting a lot of pressure on that one player to get the big haul. Whereas with 4 or 5 players, I'm actually lessening the risk in a way if I call the blanks right. But obviously, when I did it, Saka went big and kind of blew that out the water.
Yeah.
But I don't think that was necessarily a failure of the hits. It's just a failure of myself to predict who would blank and when.
I feel like, don't be so harsh in terms of, like, being able to predict. I think, like, you'd have to be, honestly, like, an absolute visionary to be able to call so many things that way, right? Because
we all want to be visionaries.
No, I get that. But you can be visionary with how you play. Like, as I said, like, you can just dial up your risk appetite from an effective ownership perspective whilst trying to mitigate your projected points loss. Because you actually take a -12. I mean, that is absolute, like, you realize that loss. So I guess, like, going back to the Saka point, it's like, if his expectations of, like, points on average every week are like 4 to 5, you're taking that on by basically saying he's going to hit the low end of his threshold in terms of performance on this very specific week, and even almost saying that for future weeks he's also going to do poorly, which I think is a very aggressive bet to take, which is why I said what I said, right? Like, it's obviously, because Timber can hit 15 points like multiple weeks in a row, but that would be the high end. But you're for that -4 gap to be realized, you almost are saying that. So for me, with an analytics perspective, or going back to the Mboma move, it's like, I think it's like, when I take a hit, I actually do not expect to recuperate the hit on that week, unless it's a double game week, right? Because when you're moving from a blank to a double, you're moving from a player who doesn't play, so 0 points expectation, to someone who might have a 5 to 6 point expectation, because 4 appearance points, and maybe they're somewhat useful at playing football, so they can actually get used the other 2 projected points. But usually when if I take a hit, and I take more hits than most engaged managers, I think I still ended up like with like top two, like double-digit data ranks last season, but I took probably maybe like, I don't know, 7 hits last season, or somewhere that's quite high. And some managers play with no hits at all and probably ended up with similar projected points because they're not as aggressive for me and sort of chasing for the upside. So all I'm saying is that when I take a hit, I don't expect to recuperate it. So one silly thing that I did this season is I took a hit for Gyökeres versus Liverpool. So kind of like Anthony Gordon, captain receiver versus Liverpool. I took a hit for Gyökeres in that game. I think I was net -6. And then suddenly I had 2 hamstring injuries, which kind of invalidated the decision. So for me, the reason why I took the hit was because I was expecting Gyökeres over 5 to 6 weeks to be able to kind of recuperate the value of that hit. But I was not expecting for him to outperform on that one game week alone. Whereas like someone like Andy Martin will sort of come on Twitter and just like kind of make fun about how bad of a decision it was. But for me, I don't feel too bad about it because I think, okay, if over the next 5 to 6 weeks it pays off, I'm happy with that. I will only judge myself when those 5 to 6 weeks are up. Now, obviously that didn't happen. So obviously something I need to consider is like, I need to be probably more available to understand that my plan is not going to be absolute. Like a lot of people were doing wildcard 13 from the start, right? At the season, they were convinced that was the strategy, myself included. And I think I should have just been available. Like I should have just, in hindsight, just been open to the idea that I probably would have maybe considered a wild card earlier. But I was also hit by sort of force of nature, right? Like I had Sar and Cunha, and they both had hamstring injuries, so that forced a wild card. But I don't feel too bad about that because that's hindsight to me. So when I say like don't take hits, I that's not what I mean. I just think if you're going to take hits, it's almost saying is Saka going to hit the low end 5 to 6 weeks in a row? Is Timber going to hit the high end 5 to 6 weeks in a row? And is it always going to stay like that for you to be comfortable with the hit over multiple players? And it's kind of like the A/B scenario playing over again. But yeah, I think if you dial up risk, there's a lot of things that could be quite fun with how you play. Calm FPL Calm strategy on Twitter is another manager who actually did this. I think he's actually like top 500 in the world, and he did exactly that. He started the season with Haaland. He wildcard did on 3 somehow. I don't know how he did this, but he got all the jammy Tottenham holes and managed to divest himself of all the Tottenham players after, and he hasn't really missed a beat. So there are players who are like analytics minded, but will, I think, intentionally go against the template. And I think that's like very suited to how you play. And I think you can still do that and achieve that with like an analytics play style. Yeah.
It's funny you say about to completely override everything that you've said to try and make myself look a little bit better. It's funny you say about them injuries because I had to wildcard in game week 3 because I had Palmer get injured, Saka get injured, and Gordon got sent off. I think that's 30 million pounds of midfielders on the bench. It's I need to wildcard, and I was able to get Haaland in. But then I also brought in Cunha and Sarr, and they both went and got injured straight after anyway. So it was a bit of a disaster of a start to the season, really.
That's straight up bad luck. And I think people kind of forget that. Like, I could play a full season FPL, but because I only manage a certain set of players, I don't manage the entire Premier League.
Yeah.
Like, specifically, my low-owned players could get hit by injuries, and that's always going to impact my decision-making quality. So I guess when I think about it, like, even within analytics, like, people completely gloss over how much injuries impact your season. Like, usually what I make transfers to do is to improve my team. But what injuries suck with FPL is that if you have a low-owned injury, you're kind of just resuscitating your team, whereas other people are improving.
Yeah.
And I always find that to be like, that's so hard emotionally to swallow because you just think I'm not allowed to play, basically. But that's the nature of the game as well.
I mean, with hindsight, I would have just taken the -12 and in game week 3 and just sold Saka, Gordon and Palmer and one of my strikers and just brought Haaland in, and then I would have had more time and I would have still had the wild card in the banker.
Because it's also about like, I think like, even evaluating when to take a hit helps, right? If you know a player's out for 2 to 3 weeks, like some people just think, I don't want to take a hit because I don't want to take a hit. But yeah, for me, like in that case, I would absolutely take a hit because this is a player who's not going to do anything for me in a few weeks. And I could get a midfielder in the short term who's going to average 4 points in 3 weeks. And I'm definitely going to be up on that hit. Right. So, yeah.
I mean, we live and learn. I thought it was a worthy play, but it didn't work out this time. Right, I've taken up more than enough of your time. So we've gone well over what you said. Bloody hell.
Sorry.
Haven't we just? No, it's my fault. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I've thoroughly enjoyed getting the fruits of your knowledge. And I feel like I'm in the forbidden garden, biting from the apple. You are the venomous snake, saying, "Come over, come and join us." And I feel like I'm about to be kicked out forever from the world that I have built around me. So
I just want to close with a thought, though.
Well, I was going to say,
yeah,
I'll let you close by trying to seduce me with your silver tongue. The final argument to get me over to these projection models.
Yeah, so I think the one last thing I want to dispel is this sort of analytics versus eye test stuff. Because I can tell you every time at FPL meets, my eyes are on the screen. I'm watching football, whereas every other manager there who's apparently an eye test manager is sat there with a pint talking to each other. So who's the eye test manager?
Well, some would say the eye test, when you factor in how much it costs to watch football in England, the eye test is the biggest pay to play model that there is.
Yeah, that could be cheating, to be fair.
Well,
if you're playing FPL from England.
It's a privilege to be able to watch all the football. So go on, one final argument to lure me over, to get me to give Solio a bash or whichever model.
Yeah, my final argument is look, everyone does it anyway, so it's not too late.
Would you say some of these people that say that they don't and make a career out of not using them actually do use them on the sly?
Yeah, I think it's a bit embarrassing, to be honest.
Well, to not use it.
As no, I think it's embarrassing to pretend like you don't use models, or to completely kind of like post it as if you're ignorant to them, when there's there's a very few select managers who very clearly almost like just dictate model outputs or solver outputs, but don't make a mention of it. Sometimes it's obviously like a contractual thing as well with some of the companies that they work with, but like I think we also need to respect that too. But yeah, like I think I understand why people who don't want to share it do that, because it's also like, it's kind of like if you were to tell everyone to use models and everyone started using models, it's going to make it a lot harder for you to do well going forwards, which is basically what's happened to this game.
Probably going to affect your YouTube channel as well to some degree if you are dependent upon it for a living. And I, no criticism to anyone who is. I think fair play to them for getting themselves in a position where they can do that. But I suppose that is part of the consideration as well. It has to be. It's like a magician revealing all the secrets, isn't it?
True. Yeah.
If you show how you can produce the coin from behind the ear, then I should have had a coin in my hand for that. That would have been ace.
Yeah.
But
I think we should just also relax with like our rank expectations too, because it's like going back to the point, like Andy probably had 100,000 subscribers maybe 4 years ago, but now he's got 500,000. You're competing with a much longer list of engaged managers. I think the amount of engaged managers actually grows a lot faster than the rate of the actual total player base. So eventually respected ranks are just going to be a lot higher on average, and that's going to be okay as well, even though of course we're all trying to win.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much, Fran, for this conversation. It's the first one I've had on my channel, and it's something that is I think it's interesting because it's completely different to the approach I use, and it's something I have been wrestling with in recent weeks, and I'm gonna go away, I'm gonna edit the video, and I'm gonna let this sink into my head, and perhaps get somebody else on to provide a counter argument and see what they say. But to be quite honest with you, I find it hard to argue against anything you've said, really, because you've explained it eloquently, you've explained it openly, and you've been very fair with your assessment, and you're also actually quite teaching me how it's possible to use these to be even more of who I am anyway, to be even more of the manager I want to be, just at a better level. So with that, is there anything you'd like to say before we go?
No, I think thank you for having me on. I think it's actually really nice to see your content around. I think it's very different from other people's. especially the vlogs, which I really enjoy. And yeah, it's nice having you around in this community.
Very kind of you. Thank you very much. So there we have it. I feel I am going to have to reflect deeply on this conversation, because I'll be honest, Fran has made some strong arguments, and as someone desperate to succeed at this game, I feel he has outlined a pathway to glory which still encapsulates everything which makes me the player that I am. However, before I commit to a final decision, the iconic FPL Firestarter D-Unit, he wants to make the case for the defence, and to save me from biting into the algorithmic apple, the one which will result in my ejection from the FPL Garden of Eden. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that one, and thank you for watching. We will see you next time.